Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be wrapping up development of our web application, incorporating what we learned in our last lesson about user authentication. So in this new version that we have, which is going to be version 20.0, basically what we're doing is adding an authentication system to our administrative interface that we have for our web store. So the interface that we have where we can add and remove items from the store, view orders in the store, we're going to restrict that so that only authorized users can do that. Now, we learned in our last lesson about, or part of the homework for the last lesson was creating that users table that has a username and a password, and the password that has a hash to it. What we're going to do is we're going to be adding a page to our admin application that's going to allow us to create these admin users. So we're going to be creating a function in our database access class called insert user. So we're going to be able to insert users into that users table that we learned about in the last lesson. Along with that, we're going to be creating a helper method called userExist, which is just going to help to check if a user exists in the database currently. And then one of the key functions that we're going to be implementing in our database access class is the authenticate user method. And that's going to be our way of, when a user logs in to our administrative website, to be able to verify whether they represent a valid username and password combination within the users table of our database. So if we actually go and look at our documentation for this version 20.0, this is our database access class. We've actually added, one thing to note is we've actually created a user class, which is just like our item class or our department class. It's just a way of managing the data related to a user. In this particular case, we store the username, the first name, and last name within this user's objects. We don't store the password for security reasons, but we're basically going to use this user object to basically implement the functionality of adding in a user from the database, adding a user to the database. So in our in our database access class, we've got three methods. One of the methods is the insert user method, which basically is going to take a user object, which is going to, as we just saw, it contains a first name, a last name, and a username, and then a password, and then it's just going to basically perform an insert on that user's table. It uses a helper method called userExist, which I had mentioned a minute ago. That method simply just runs a select query on the database to see if the username passed in already exists, and if it doesn't already exist because it's primary key, then basically it's going to allow us to continue to insert the user. Basically, we're just building an insert query on the user's table, and we're going to be using the sprintf function, formatted string function, and we're going to be inserting as values into our user's table the username for the user, their first name and their last name, and then their password. But as we learned about last time, we're actually submitting the hash of their password, so it's going to be a 40-character string. It's going to be the output of the SHA1 function, hash function, on the password that was passed in. And then we basically just test as we normally do to see if the user was added, and then return an error or output an error and return false if there was a problem, and if not, it's just going to return the user object that was successfully inserted into the database. Now, probably the key method we've added to this is authenticate user, which is a method that takes a username string and a password string. And what it does is it runs a select query on the user's table, and it basically checks to see if the combination exists of the username passed in and then the SHA1 hash of the password passed to the method. So, for example, you can see in our sprintf function, we can see that where we're implementing providing data for these wildcard characters in the formatting string. The first one we're providing is just the username, the plain username, and then for the password, we're actually providing again the SHA1 hash on that particular password. So basically, the select query is going to check the database. Does the username exist with this user? Does a row in the user table exist with this username given, and then also that has whose password has the hash value that's equal to the hash value of the password passed in? And if so, basically we run the query. If that is true when it comes up, we're going to return a user object that contains the username, first name, and last name of the user that was added, that's the valid user in the database. Otherwise, it's going to return false and say, no, this user can't be authenticated. That that username and hash password hash pair do not exist in the table. So as far as the admin interface goes, we've added a new administrative page called adduser.php, which is going to allow us to basically add new user accounts to our database. And so actually if we pull up the administrative site, this is what the page is going to look like. Now when you try to go to any of the different pages of our website, of the admin site, you're going to get a non-authorized warning. And you're going to say you must be logged in to view this content. Click here to log in. And so we're going to have our login. In this case, we're going to be using just the default admin account that we had set up before to log in for the first time, which is why that was part of why we created that in the last homework example. So a login with admin and then password that's that's right. I changed the password. Actually, I had set up the default password on this account to be admin. So admin, and then we log in. And what you're going to be using on your web application is admin, and then just the blank space or the empty string to log in for the first time. Once you're able to log in, it's going to say welcome to the store. It's going to forward you to admin.php, and then basically you're going to see a new tab over here, or a new task over here called add admin user, in which now you can create a regular user account that has a valid password. So for example, jsmith, password, now we can add the user. User account was successfully created. We can see in our new admin site, it has a welcome message after we've logged in that welcomes us by our first name. We have a log out link, so I'm going to go ahead and log out. We're going to talk about that in a second. And now I'm going to go ahead and log back in with this new password new account that I created. And so now you can see it says welcome John. And so that's how you're going to be able to add new users to your website. And once you've done that, you can go ahead and get rid of that insecure administrative account. Now the way that we've implemented the authentication is in all the pages that we want to have to require a user to be logged in, we've added an include statement that includes this file here called adminauth.php. And if we take a look at that page, basically what it does is it creates a new session manager object, which gives us access, starts a session and gives us access to session variables. And basically what it does is it performs a test to see if a user session variable exists. If a user session, using the in-session method that we've used before, if a user session variable does not exist, then basically what it's going to do, it's going to use this header function that we learned about to redirect a user to notauthorized.php. So for example, if I log out here and I try to go to update item department, you can see that we've been forwarded to notauthorized.php, and that's because we didn't have a valid session. And the valid session is created in our new page that we have called login.php. So we have a login.php script and a logout.php script, which perform their respective duties. One is to log in the user and one is to log out the user. So you saw how that login page works. If we go and take a look at the login script, we can see that basically what it does is it starts a session, and then if the action is login, and it actually performs a test to see if the user is already logged in, because maybe a user might accidentally go to the login page even though they're already logged in, and so we just want to test for that. So you can sort of ignore this for now. That's just basically sort of additional error catching logic. But the main part of the script that we're interested in is if the user's action was log in and they weren't already logged in, we're going to create a connection to the database, and then we're going to authenticate the user based on that username and password they provided on the form we just saw. This authenticate user function will return false, as we saw, if the user is not a valid user. Otherwise, it will return a user object that represents that user. So what we're going to do is, if the user is valid, we're going to store that user object that's returned using the set variable method of our session manager class. We're going to add a session variable called user, and we're going to store that user object within there. And so that's why this auth admin page admin off page will work is because what it's going to do is it's going to test to see if that user session variable exists. So if this user hasn't gone through this login page, successfully been validated, and that user session variable has been created, then every time they try to go to these pages, they're going to get redirected to the non-authorized page. The other thing is that if a user does get logged in, what then it automatically does is it's going to relocate them, redirect them to the home page of the admin site, which is admin.php. If not, it's going to output a error message saying the username and password has failed or you were already logged in. So for example, just to show again, if we go to, this is login.php. If I log in with a new user and we click login, we can see that we actually get forwarded to admin.php, which is just the welcome page for this administrator website. So that's how the login part of it works. We have a corresponding log out script. And as we learned in our last lesson, the way to log out, to have a user log out is authenticated users simply just end the session. And so all we do in this script is create a new session, continue a new session by creating our session manager object. We again check to see if the user is already logged in, and that's for basically some error checking on this page to see if a user is trying to access this page, if they've already been logged in and they came here unintentionally. And then the key thing that we're going to do is call the destroy method on our session manager class, which, as we learned about when we learned about sessions, goes through the 4 steps that we have for properly destroying a session. One of the main ones being destroying that session cookie, and also destroying the session data. And then so basically we use this test up here to see if the user was logged in, and if the user was logged in, then we let them know you've been successfully logged out. And the reason we actually go ahead and test this up here for this sort of pretty not necessarily error handling, but to logic of the script as to whether to output an error message or say that they were successfully logged out. We call this method in session to set our was logged in flag before we call destroy, because as we know in destroy, we destroy all that session data. So if we had reversed the order of these, then we wouldn't be able to see if the user was logged in or not, and so we wouldn't be able to output a message that says you were successfully logged out, or rather output a message that says you cannot log out because you are not logged in. And so that's basically how our logout script works. Now, one other feature that we've added is we've actually updated our admin header page, which was previously adminheader.html, which was the header page for all of our websites that basically had links to all of these different tasks. And we've updated this beginning section to just add, when a user logs in, a welcome message that says welcome, and it has the user's first name, and then also just outputs a logout link so that they can log out of the store. And basically it just calls that logout.php script. So if we actually look at our adminheader.php, everything is pretty much the same, except that we've added in our header table, which includes that educator logo and the part of it that says educator admin site. We've added some PHP code. So this adminheader.html has been renamed adminheader.phtml because now it contains a combination of HTML and PHP code. And we've added just a little bit of a conditional check here. And what it does is it just tests if the user is logged in or not, and it does so by checking that session variable. If the user session variable exists, then what it's going to say is it's going to welcome, and it's going to output their first name, and it gets that from the user variable that's been stored in the session. As we saw when we logged in, when we authenticate our user, if the user is authentic, it returns a user object that contains all the information, first name, last name, and username about the user, and gets stored in the session variable user. So on our admin page, we're going to be accessing that user variable, and that's going to give us access to the first name. So that's how we go ahead and output the first name, and then here we simply just have a simple link to log out. And so that's basically a little dynamic content that we've added to this version 20 of the website. So that ends today's lesson. It's been a pleasure teaching you this course, and thank you for watching Educator.com.